Hello and good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. It's good to see you. Good to see you. Welcome to Jevim's research channel. Be advised that this channel is not for anyone under the age of 18. Also, the research and discoveries of this channel should not ever reflect the personal opinion or views of Jevim or her team unless publicly stated. Please understand that the opinions of the audience is also not a reflection of what or how Jevim feels. Let's bring a curious mind and open heart to these spaces for educational purposes only. Good morning. Yeah, so we're doing a number 3 of this book. It's very interesting to me. Um, the magnitude of things we just do not know about our world, things that we just have no clue of and completely left oblivious. Like I can tell you that can you all hear me okay? I hope so. Okay. I can tell you that I know that like these revelations that are coming out about the elites, like they have their own broadband, if that makes sense. They have their own. Like they don't even hit on our radars. It's so wild. It's so wild. And that's intentional. So anyway, so these Jewish folklore tales are pretty dark. They're pretty dark and they are all surrounded with demonizing the feminine. You're not going to be able to convince me any different. And we're going to get right into it, into Lilith's cave. Poor Lilith. Oh, I think she's been framed. How about y'all? I think Lilith has been framed. I'm going to have to borrow it. Yesterday was the homunculus, basically Frankenstein of Memnindes. I believe it's how you say his name. And Helen of Troy. So today we're probably going to pick up where we left off because they're all very interesting stories. Let's see. The next one's let's see. The finger. Yeah, the finger's where we'll pick up. That sounds crazy. What page is that on? 55. We're going to the finger. Agreed. Lilith's cave. We didn't even get all the way through the introduction because it was going to make me so sleepy. Who is that? MacGyver. Hello, MacGyver. Hello, welcome. What page was that on? Nope. There's Helen. That's where we finished. We're going to the finger now. I thought the Grimm brothers was pretty dark. But this is really light. I wonder if there's any other types of translations to it too. Okay. One night long ago in the city of Suffolk, 3 young men went out for a walk. Reuben, the eldest, was to be married the next day to a beautiful and wealthy maiden, and his companions laughed and joked and teased their friend. The moon was full that night, and the young men decided to leave the beaten path and walk in the thick forest that surrounded the city. The moonlight illuminated even the darkest parts of the forest, and they passed through it fearlessly. At last they reached the river bank and rested on large rocks near the shore. While they reached, while they watched the river below. Here they continued to make merry, for they felt as if they were intoxicated. Hmm. Now it's a bachelor party, is what it sounds like, right? Of course, they're going to be intoxicated, y'all. It was during this time that one of them noticed something strange nearby. It was an object the size of a finger that stuck out of the earth. They got they got up to examine it, assuming it was a root. But when they came closer, they saw to their amusement that it was indeed a finger that had emerged there. Okay, is like some corpse bride stuff, right? Disney. Now on a different night, the young men might have felt pity for the one buried so near the surface, but filled with high spirits, y'all. They jested about it instead. One of them said, "Who among us will put a wedding ring on this finger?" Aha! And Reuben, the groom to be, quickly replied that it must be he, because he was to be the first one to marry. Then, as his friends looked on in amusement, Reuben took off his ring and slipped it on that finger. Pronouncing as he did the words, oh gosh, I don't want to pronounce those words. You see those words right there? I don't want to say it. That's a spell. Okay. You are betrothed to me, basically, 3 times as the law requires. You see that? You have to say it 3 times. This is in Jewish law. What's up with that? Okay. But no sooner did he finish speaking than the finger began to twitch, move to the horror of the young men, and jumped back at the sight. This is that ancient tale of the corpse bride. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Suddenly, the whole hand reached out from the earth, twitching and gasping. And as they stared at it in horror, frozen in place, the ground began to rumble as if the earth were about to open. Who is that? Hello? Kaisafa? Hello? Yep. We're reading a Jewish folklore version of The Corpse Bride from Disney. That is so cool. Suddenly, the body of a woman wearing a tattered shroud rose out of the earth, her dead eyes staring directly into those of Reuben. Her arms open and she cried out, "My husband!" in a terrible and terrifying voice. Oh, wait a minute. My husband. Hearing this, the 3 friends screamed in horror and took to their heels, running through the oops forest as fast as they could. But this time the way was dark, for the moon had slipped behind a cloud, and as they ran, they tore their clothes on thorns and branches. But never did they stop running or even dare to look back until they had reached their homes in the city. For all the time they ran, they heard the unearthly wail of a dead woman close behind them. Only when they were safely in their own homes with the doors locked and the windows barred did they dare to breathe a sigh of relief and tend to the many cuts they had acquired in their wild dash through the forest. The next morning, the 3 friends met together, still pale and shaken, and they agreed to keep the horrible events of the night a secret, for they were deeply ashamed of their jest and its terrible consequences. When Reuben even when Reuben went to the ritual bath to prepare for the wedding, hold on, we get ritual baths here. That's interesting. Very, very interesting. We get ritual baths before weddings. Okay. And left his friends alone with their confused thoughts. Now a great many people had gathered, and Reuben and his bride belonged to two of the most distinguished families in Safed. But just as the ceremony was about to begin, a blood curdling shriek came from the back of the crowd. We're talking about zombie wife here, followed by many other screams, provoking a panic. For there stood the corpse of a woman wearing only a worm eaten shroud. Most of the crowd, including the bride and the families of the bride and groom, ran away when they saw her, until none were left there except for Reuben and the rabbi, who had been about to pronounce the wedding vows. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Hold on. Hold on. Okay, I had totally forgotten that I did not do a sortes, so I will have to do that. I have to do that after this story because we'll do more than one story. It's very interesting that they take ritual baths, though, because Jesus took a ritual bath, didn't he? Yeah. The rabbi alone among all of those present retained his composure. He addressed himself to the corpse and said, "Why is it, woman, that you have left your final resting place and returned to the living?" That why would he do that as if that was like something normal? Okay. And the corpse replied in her unearthly voice, "What blemish does the bridegroom find in me that he should want to wed another? For cannot all the world see that he is wed to me?" And she held up her hand, on which the ring of the bridegroom could be seen, with his initials engraved in it. Then the rabbi turned to the bridegroom, who was crouched in terror behind him, and asked, let me make this a little bit bigger, if what the woman said was true. In a trembling voice, the young man told of his walk through the forest with his friends and of the jest they had played when they had found the finger sticking out of the earth. And the rabbi asked, "Did you pronounce the sacred vow 3 times?" 3 times. There we go. The young man meekly nodded, and the rabbi asked, "Was it done in the presence of 2 witnesses?" Again, Reuben nodded. Then the rabbi looked very grave and said that the rabbinic court would have to be convened to discuss the matter. For in the eyes of the law, with a capital L, the eyes of the law, it appeared that the young man had indeed bound himself to that corpse in matrimony. When the bridegroom heard these terrible words, he fainted dead away and had to be carried off to his home. In the days that followed, the city of Suffolk was in an uproar, for who had ever heard of a living man marrying a corpse? And the parents of Reuben begged the rabbi to find a way to free their son from the terrible curse. As for the rabbi, he immersed himself in meditation and in the study of responsa, which for a searching for a precedent. But there was none. Instead, one would have to be set. On the day the court was convened, the rabbi called upon the corpse to appear, and she did so, still wearing the worm eaten shroud in which she had been buried. Under oath, she told what young Reuben had done in the forest. Then the rabbi called upon 2 friends who reluctantly confirmed what she said. At last, the rabbi called upon the bridegroom, who also confessed that the vow had been made, and pleaded with the court to annul the marriage, for he had never intended for it to happen. Then the court addressed the dead woman and asked her if she would relinquish her claim, but the corpse was adamant that the marriage must be consummated. For while she had lived, she had never married and had thus been denied her hour of joy. And she was determined to receive after death what she had been denied in life. Wow. Then the rabbi called upon the parents of the bridegroom, who testified that the betrothal of their son to the daughter of a wealthy man had been made even before the birth of the children. The two couples had vowed that if one had a boy child and one a girl, then they were to be wed, and the parents of the bride confirmed this vow. Finally, when all the testimony had been taken, the court gathered together to discuss the case, while young Reuben trembled, his eyes avoiding the terrible corpse that also stood waiting among them. At last the court reached a decision, which the rabbi announced. He said, "It is true that Reuben did what Reuben did, that in the presence of two witnesses unwillingly make a vow of marriage that appears to be valid." Here the rabbi paused, and the young man and his parents were filled with terror. Then the rabbi continued, "There are, however, other factors that must be considered. First, the wedding vow would deny the betrothal, and it is widely known that one vow may not be permitted to negate on an earlier one. Second, the vows of the bridegroom were not made with intention. Finally, there is no precedent for a claim on the living by the dead." Wow. Finally, there is no precedent for a claim of the living by the dead. Wow. Therefore, the vows cannot be accepted as valid because the bride is not from among the living. The marriage is thus declared null and void. Wow. Now, when the rabbi uttered these words, young Reuben fainted again, this time from relief. But the corpse, having lost her chance to wed either in life or death, let forth an ear shattering shriek, which pierced the souls of all those assimilated there and filled the hearts with horror. Hold on one second. Okay. Then then she collapsed upon the ground and became again as one of the dead. When those assembled had at last calmed down, the rabbi gave orders to have the corpse reburied with proper ritual and at a greater depth, so that the tragedy like the one that had just occurred would never happen again. And after her burial, the rabbi called upon the parents of the true bride to fulfill the vow they had made before their daughter had been born, and to complete the wedding ceremony, which had been so terribly interrupted. This was done, and at last the wedding of Reuben and his true bride took place, and that was from the 16th century. Wow. Wow. So this is deep. This is a retelling of a story. You got to remember all of this was like oral traditions, and this is from Palestine. It's very interesting, isn't it? And Suffolk. Mhm. Definitely. All right. So I wanted to start with a bibliomancy of sortes, but I forgot because I'm a very forgetful person. Okay. The argument. That's what I'm going to read. The angel ended, and in Adam's ear so charming left his voice that he, a while, thought him still speaking, stood still fixed to hear. Then, as new waked, thus gratefully replied, what thanks sufficient and what recompense equal I have to render thee divine. Amazing. Amazing. All right. This is in Suffolk too. The punishment. Sort of like it's like fairy tale. I would love to see some of this put to some animation of sorts. Well, I mean, I guess it has been because that's the Corpse Bride. Yeah. Okay. Long ago in the city of Suffolk, a rich man sought out Rabbi Isaac Luria, known as the Ari, and said, you are known as a seer. You can envision even the darkest secrets hidden in a man's past. If such a thing is possible, then I am prepared to repent. If not, then I see no reason to have faith in God. The Ari returned to the man, peered into his eyes, and told him everything about himself. From the time he had been born, including every one of his sins. Wow. The rich man was startled at what he had heard, and he confessed to everything except that he denied having sinned with his maidservant, who has since died. So the Ari motioned with his hand and drew her forth from the Sitrahara, the other side. When the man saw her, he stiffened, grew pale, and fell at the Ari's feet, confessing his sin with her. Oh, this is like some, like, oh, hush, okay. Then he begged the Ari to send her away, for the soul that he had called forth clung to his own, and he could not bear it. But the Ari refused to remove her from his presence, saying, our masters taught that whatever joins himself to a woman in sin shall be bound up with her for all time. Wow. In this world and the next, for in both worlds she will cling to him and refuse to depart. Only one thing can wrench her free. What is it? Screamed the man. Tell me, for I cannot bear the pain in my soul. And the Ari said, in your case, the only penance can be death by fire. Shit. Wow. So it sounds like falling in love with a woman was made a sin by Isaac Luria. Y'all know who he is? Isaac Luria. A very popular Jewish mystic. The man cried out in great pain, even such a death would be better than to lose my soul like this again. Know then, said the Ari, that the law requires that hot lead be used. What law is this? What law is this? For falling in love with a woman. Okay. The man flinched at this, but said in a strangled voice, I am ready to die. The Ari commanded that lead be brought and heated over the flames. He ordered the man to once again make a full confession of his sins, and he did. Then he told the man to throw himself to the ground, stretched out his hands, closed his eyes, and opened his mouth. Oh, God. This is kind of sadist. The man did all this and awaited a terrible death, his soul coiled in terror. At the moment, the Ari poured honey into his mouth and said, "Your sin has been lifted and your soul freed, nor shall you die." God, some beer porn. God, that's crazy. And when the man tasted the honey and heard these words, he fainted. I think we found a mystery. Yeah, they get scared to death because they fell in love with a woman. Where was it? It was in another book. I just covered it. And Almond Hillman is correct. It's in that book. It's in that video. Yeah, it's in that video. But when he opened his eyes, he was like a new man, for the great weight of the sin had been lifted, and along with it had vanished the soul that had clung so tightly to his own. And he believed all the rest of the days in righteousness, his repentance complete. And that's in Palestine from 16th century too. This is some craziness. Craziness. Making a lot of connections here. House of Witches. Anybody watching want to hear about the House of Witches? I'm going to read it. Okay, we're going to Damascus. In Damascus, there was a house of witches not far from the Jewish cemetery. Those witches used their powers in strange and unspeakable ways. Their evil struck like an arrow without warning. They were the pestilence that walked in the darkness and the destruction that laid waste at noon. Wow. I don't hear any kindness at all in these Jewish folk tales about the feminine. Yeah. Even the dead were not spared their ghastly intentions, for the witches had begun to steal the bodies of pious Jews from their coffins and to do evil things to pollute their souls, which were still in the process of parting from the shells they had inhabited so long. Oh, yeah, they call us the shells and vessels. Okay. At last, the Ari sent Rabbi Yahim Vital to exterminate that nest of evil. Oh my goodness. And when he arrived, he told the Jews of the community to inform him at once if any one of them died. When the first such death was reported to him, Vital attended the funeral and followed the coffin as it was carried to the grave. But those carrying the coffin felt that it was too light, and when they opened it, they found, in their horror, that it was indeed empty. Then they knew it was the witches had snatched the body of the man. Vital told the four coffin bearers to wait in the cemetery before he would be back within an hour. And before he left, he gave them special holy names to pronounce should they find themselves in danger. The men repeated those names over and over to themselves so that they would not forget them. After that, Vital went directly to the house of the witches. He crept up to the window of the house and peered inside. There he saw the witches laughing together, and from their comments he understood that they had done something terrible to the body of the man in order to force his spirit to become a wandering soul that would never find any rest. That's crazy. Then Vital grew very angry and pronounced a holy name that made him invisible. After that, he went to the door of the witches and knocked. They asked who it was. He said, "It is the soul of he that you have condemned to wander. I have returned to seek my revenge." Now, when the witches heard this, they become frightened, for although witches are unafraid of living men, they are terrified of spirits. That's a new one on me. Anyway, especially angry ones. The witches all sought to hide, but before they could, Vito pronounced the series of holy names that the Ari had given him. And at that moment, every witch in the house turned into a black dog and went dashing out the door towards the cemetery. That is very Hecate. That is very Hecate. 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 All at once, the coffin bearers saw the dogs rushing toward them, barking horribly. At first, the men were frozen with fear, but then they recalled the names that Vito had given them. And as soon as they began to pronounce them, they found themselves strengthened until they felt as brave as he was. The dogs ignored them completely, however, and ran right by, as if they did not see them at all. And they split up and ran to the four corners of the cemetery. When the men saw this, they followed after them. And that is how they found the parts of the body of the man who had died. For the witches had cut his body into four parts and carried them to the corners of the cemetery. And now they were rushing to recover the body and bring it back together in order to free themselves from the spirit's terrible revenge. Oh my gosh. It was then that Vito reached the cemetery and saw how the witches had scattered the poor man's body. His anger grew so great that he pronounced another spell, and all of the witches turned into worms and other vermin, and that is what they remained. Wow. Then the coffin bearers gathered the parts of the man's body and placed them together in the coffin. The rabbi closed it and pronounced a series of holy names. When they reopened it, they found that the body of the man was intact, as if the witches had never touched it at all. And they knew that his soul as well had been saved. Then Rabbi Vital and the others buried by the man and said Kaddish after him, the prayer for the dead, and never again did the witches cause harm to the Jews of that city. That's from Syria. That's very, very interesting oral tradition. We know how it all changes. So, yeah, it seems crazy. It seems crazy. Mm-mm-mm. I am going to take a quick break. Oops, sorry about that. Hold on. What do you all think about these stories so far? It's very interesting to me how not a lot is known, I think, in at least mainstream occultism about this book. Who knows? It's very patriarchal. It's very woman damning for sure. For sure. Okay. We're going to get to the beast. The beast. Okay. There once was a wealthy man and wife who longed more than anything else to have a child of their own. Over the years, the wife had tried every known remedy in order to conceive. Now, listen, there's another story that we learned about trouble conceiving and fertility, having to do weird things for fertility, right? Different things for fertilities. Over the years, the wife had tried every known remedy in order to conceive, including potions of every kind, but still the couple was without children. Now the man, who was a merchant, heard from others that there was a wise old man among the Jews, whose name was Elijah, who could help them have a child. And when they had exhausted every other means, the merchant and his wife went to the Jewish quarter of Cairo and sought out the old man. Mm. They found that Elijah lived in an almost empty hut in the poorest part of the quarter. He possessed nothing except for a robe he wore and a prayer book. The merchant and his wife wondered to themselves how such a poor man could be of help to them. Still, they were desperate, so they told the old man how much they wanted to have a child, and they offered to pay him whatever he asked if he could help them. Elijah said, "What do you want, a son or a daughter?" The merchant replied, "To have a son of my own is what I want more than anything else in the world." Then Elijah told them to bring him pen and paper, and when they did, he wrote out an amulet using holy names. He told them to place the amulet in a cup of wine and for both of them to drink that cup, and in 9 months' time they would have a son of their own. What does that sound like? That sounds like mystery. That sounds like definitely magic. Okay. Somehow, the quiet confidence of Elijah soothed the pair and gave them hope. When the merchant said, "We will always be grateful if what you have said comes true, tell me, how can I repay you?" Elijah replied, "Do nothing for now, but when the child is born, make a donation in the charity box of the synagogue on the corner of the street which serves the poorest Jews. That will suffice." Well, I mean, the other person asked for firstborn for a year. This guy just wants a donation. That's awesome. Then the merchant and his wife thanked him many times and turned to go. But before they left, the old man said, "Wait, there is one more thing that I must tell you." Oh, God. There's always a cliff note. The merchant and his wife turned back, wondering what it was. And Elijah said, "The son that will be born to you is not destined to be wed. He must remain unmarried all his life, for it is written that on the night he weds, he will be devoured by a beast." Jesus. As they heard this prophecy, the high hopes of the couple was suddenly shaken. They stood silent, but at last the merchant said, "Is there nothing we can do to spare our children of this terrible fate? Or our child of this terrible fate?" And the old man answered, "No, I'm sorry to say, all that you can do is avoid making any match for him. And when he is old enough to understand, explain that it is his destiny to remain unwed." And the merchant and his wife assured Elijah that they would heed his wording, and that if indeed they were blessed with a son, they would see to it that he was never betrothed. Then they took their leave. By this time, they were much more solemn. I don't know. I think I would just make a donation and not worry about taking that little spell at that point. That's just me. Okay. When they returned home, the merchant placed the amulet that Elijah had written into a silver goblet and filled it with his finest wine, a bottle that had been saved since he had been born. Wow. The merchant and his wife drank from the goblet, one sip at a time, until it was empty. It was then they discovered that the amulet had dissolved into the wine, Not a trace of it was to be found. Now, see, it's dissolving, self dissolving. We're talking about. We're talking about drugs. Okay. And when the couple saw that they had sensed the prophecy of the old man would indeed come true and they would become parents, but they did not think about his admonition. To their mutual delight, the merchant and his wife soon found that she was with child, and all during the pregnancy she took great care so that the child should not be lost. And at the end of 9 months, she gave birth to a beautiful son, and the merchant and his wife felt that they had been greatly blessed. The merchant did not forget his promise to Elijah to give money to the synagogue for the poor. He gave them a great donation, enough to sustain them for a full year. But he did not dwell on the warning of the old man, for the time his son would think of marriage was far off. Yeah, this is again, you don't heed warnings and prophecies and things. It's like, oh, I got time, no worry, no worry, and that's on you. Yeah. In the years that followed, the man and his wife raised their son with loving care, for he was more precious to them than anything in the world. From time to time, a marriage was proposed for him, for such early betrothals were the custom. The boy's parents always turned down these offers, giving one excuse or another, but never, of course, the true reason. The day came, however, when the young man himself informed his parents that he wished to be wed, and the parents argued long into the night about whether to tell the boy the prophecy of the old man. In the end, they decided not to, and instead made up their minds to see to it that the boy was indeed wed, but under circumstances that would protect him from every danger. Now, in his travels, the merchant had once came into possession of ooh, a small island in a distant sea. The island was uninhabited by man or beast, and the merchant thought it would be a perfect place to have a wedding. Therefore, once the match had been made, the merchant saw to it that a fine mansion was built on that island, surrounded with a large stone wall that would protect his son from every kind of danger. So, too, did he have guards posted to guard the mansion day and night. 1 year later, when the time for the wedding had arrived, the merchant was informed that the mansion was ready. Then the merchant had his finest sailing ship outfitted and brought both families on board, along with the bride and groom and many guests. Of course, the bride and groom were never permitted to glimpse at each other, as was the custom. That is so crazy. That is crazy. Mm-mm. The voyage was a time of great rejoicing, and the merchant and his wife never dwelled at all on the prophecy of the old man, for they felt that they had done everything possible to protect their son from danger. When the ship had at last docked on the lovely island, all expressed wonder and delight. The sand of the beaches were pure white, and there were fruit trees of every kind, as well as wild grapes and berries. So too were all the guests astonished at the extravagant, sorry. It was constructed of marble like a palace, and the chamber of the bride and groom was set at the top of the spiral tower. There the merchant felt sure his son would be safe. This is crazy. The wedding festivities continued for 3 days and nights before the vows were finally said. It was then that the merchant's son saw his bride for the first time. She was astonishingly beautiful with raven hair, that reached to her waist, and the young man felt himself to be the most fortunate groom in the world. At last, he and the bride climbed the stairs to the tower together and stood on the threshold of the bridal chamber. The young man led his bride inside and closed the door. As he gazed at her, he was filled with awe at her beauty. He admired especially her hands, with their fine, slender fingers and long nails. He smiled shyly at her, but she seemingly afraid to lift her eyes from the floor. When at last she did, the young man was astonished to see a look of wild desire in them, unlike anything he had ever seen. When he stepped forward to embrace her, he suddenly heard a low growl. The young man looked around in confusion, wondering where it could have come from. He turned back just in time to see the fangs of the beast as it leaped at him from the very place the bride had been. Oh wow. Okay, that is an oral tradition from Egypt. Wow. These are some weird tales, y'all. These are really, really weird. Yeah. Okay, let's see what's next. The rabbi and the witch. Let's see, what time is it? Yeah, we got time for one more. Okay. So, Lilith's cave is actually just like one story in this whole book of damning women. That is wild to me. That is absolutely crazy to me. I have a Jewish friend. I'm going to ask him if he knows of these. Okay. Long, long ago, strange things began to happen. Jews disappeared for no reason and were never heard from again. They left the city but never reached their destinations, or they started back but never reached home. At first, the people thought it must be the work of thieves, but it seemed strange that the only victims were Jews. As more and more disappeared, most of the merchants, the people became alarmed and they turned to Rabbi Janiah for help. Rabbi Janiah learned that everyone who had vanished had passed along the same road. Disguised as a merchant, he set out on that very road in a wagon filled with wine barrels. Certainly a tempting target. Some of the other rabbis had warned him that such a journey might be filled with danger, but he had assured them that no harm would befall him, for he was undertaking the mission in the name of God. Rabbi Janiah rode all morning and afternoon, and nothing unusual happened. As evening approached, he came to an inn and decided to spend the night there. Now an old woman ran the inn, and she recognized at once that Rabbi Janiah was a Jew, for it was clear for all the world to see. She smiled to herself and invited him to make himself at home. After that long journey, Rabbi Janiah was thirsty, and he asked the old woman for a drink of water. He noticed that she turned her back to him as she poured it, and he became suspicious. Why? So too did he see how her lips were moving as she brought it to him, and he wondered if she might be casting a spell. So men can cast spells in this book and do magic and claim your firstborn, or claim like tragedy or a spell upon your firstborn. But women in this book are automatically guilty before proven. It's just a book to demonize women. Okay. It's actually oral tales of folklore to demonize women. Okay. When she turned away to tend the fire, he spilled a little of the water on the floor, and he didn't blink an eye when he saw the puddle turn to snakes and slither away. When he spoke to the woman, he said, "My thanks, good woman, for the water. I'll drink it later. Now perhaps I could interest you in purchasing some of my wines." The old woman was delighted to learn that the Jew was a wine merchant, for she knew that all of his possessions would soon be her own. But she concealed these thoughts and said, "Well, perhaps, but I must taste any wine before I buy it." And Rabbi Janiah said, "Of course, that is only to be expected. Wait here, and I will bring you some." Then the rabbi left the inn and returned to his wagon. Taking the glass of enchanted water with him, he poured some of it into a wineskin that he finished filling from the spout of a barrel. Then he returned to the inn and handed the wineskin to the old woman, encouraging her to taste his wares. She emptied it in a single gulp, and no sooner had she done this than she was turned into an ass. The beast began to run wildly about the inn, causing great damage. At last, Rabbi Janiah dragged the ass outside and tied it to his wagon. Then he took it, braying and kicking, back to the city. There he mounted the ass and rode it into the marketplace, tending to reveal the cause of the mysterious disappearances. Now there was a witch living in the city who was a sister of the old witch who ran the inn. And when she saw Rabbi Janai riding that donkey, she not only knew that it had been enchanted, but she recognized her sister as well. She quickly mumbled a spell to turn the ass back into a human being. As soon as the spell had spoken, the ass became the old woman, crawling on her hands and knees with Rabbi Janiah riding upon her. So it was that Rabbi Janiah was seen in public riding upon a woman. The wags and gossips still laugh when they tell the tale, but they speak of the rabbi with pride for he outfoxed the witch, and so greatly did she fear his powers that she confessed returning the missing merchants into donkeys and vowed to reverse the spells if the rabbi would let her go. He agreed, and within moments the hoofbeats in the field all around her inn turned to footsteps, and all the missing merchants returned home. As for the witch, she and her sister dined together at an inn that night and drank many glasses of wine to celebrate her escape from the Jew. But no one seemed to have seen them after that, and no trace of them was ever found except for the two ornery asses they were said to have left behind. And that is from Babylonia. That's Babylonian, 5th century Babylonian, y'all. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I'm pretty convinced that all the Abrahamic religions hate women. I'm convinced. Yeah. So I mean, we've seen evidence. Where are we at? I've seen evidence of it. What are your all's thoughts? That's my thought anyway. Yep. We've heard from Palestine and Babylon and Egypt and Syria, tells, oral tells. Hey, Ozone Moment, good to see you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. This whole book, I don't know how much you've heard, but I'm going to try to get through all of it because it's Lilith's cave, but it's all stories to demonize women. And this book's not really hardly ever talked about, right? As in folklore, Jewish folklore. Yeah. So I'm convinced. Anyway, we're coming up on an hour, And I'm going to be doing another live at 1 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be on the ancient hammer gods. There's many of them. I'm probably going to butcher a bunch of names, but that's okay. I'm showing up for it and I'm trying. Okay. All right. So, if I have the energy to do it tomorrow, I'm going to be doing it around 8 o'clock again tomorrow. What story is next? Let's see. This one's going to be good. The Door to Guyana. Gehenna. Gehenna. Guyana. Gehenna. One of those. This is going to be one of those. All right. Thank you all for hanging with me. See you later.